So my name is Efrat Fenigson. I am Chief Marketing Officer for a global company today, and I have been a CMO in various startups or companies in Israel that are operating in the global market, doing marketing all over the world. I've been in the industry for about 18 years in the intersection between technology and marketing and strategy. And I've been really strategizing and building marketing operations and plans for different types of organizations, different types of companies all around the world in different types of industries as well. It can be technology, but not just. So my background is really how to influence people perception, how to make people believe certain things, do certain things. I think a good marketeer, that's what we do best, right? We build a narrative, we build campaigns, we build strategies that will target specific audiences and call them to specific actions. And that's what I've been doing for many, many years. I'm also a single mom, and actually my ex-husband, the father of my son, lives in Australia, in Melbourne, and this is where, and I'm Australian as well. I used to live in Australia for 6 years, so during this time I'm very well connected to what's happening in Israel as well as in Australia, and there's a personal story there as well, and my son cannot see his father for the past almost 3 years because of the situation. Wow. And it's very, very sad. I mean, with everything that's going on there. We can talk about it later if we want, but basically, I'm an activist as well, and I have been for the last few years. For many years, I've been very active in the feminism front. Yep. I try to really look at feminism in from the equality point of view, and not radical feminism, just to make sure that women's voices are heard and that they're getting what they need to get in terms of employment and gaps in salaries, etc. Right. So that's where I've been activist, and then in the last couple of years, I've stepped up my political activism with everything that started going on in Israel, with a lot of corruption in the government, then assisted with the protests for Benjamin Netanyahu, against Benjamin Netanyahu, and then yes, more and more active in the COVID protests recently.
Absolutely. So. I noticed on your Twitter profile, you wrote, you're allergic to tyranny. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, I think that's what got me to get out of the house a couple of years ago, when I started really being more active in the streets. I looked at everything that's going on, and I looked at the levels of corruption, greed, lies, and really saw everything that's coming together. And this is from the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm looking at my paycheck and how much money I'm giving to the government in my taxes every month, and how much duties I have as a citizen. And in the balance, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense that me, as a small citizen in a country, have to put up so much for the government or the country or the state. Yeah. And the government, the state, and the people that should be representing me in the parliament or the government are not doing the same for me. Instead, all they're doing is lying and deceiving and working against the citizens. And then in the last year, it accelerated with how much the tyranny or the elite of the country, and obviously of the world as well, is going against its own citizens. And I'm just allergic to it, to the point that I have to do something about it. I can't just sit and watch everything unfolding, unraveling, and stay quiet.
When did you start realizing that something wasn't quite right here? when it comes in terms of the lockdowns, restrictions. I mean, the vaccines we talk about separately, but when did you sort of wake up to the fact that you wanted to push back a bit and get involved in the protests in the context of COVID?
Yeah, so I think that right at the beginning, March, April, I was under a shock like everyone, and I was breaking down to see, you know, everything that's going on. And it took me a good couple of months to kind of start to analyze the atmosphere, analyze the environment with the tools I have as a marketeer, and I will talk about those tools very soon, and realize that there's an agenda behind this, and it's not just happening because they're really so concerned about my good or my best, you know, my best interest. And so once I started identifying that there's an agenda here, I started digging, I started researching, I started learning more. At first, I must admit, it was more in a local perspective. I looked at what's happening in Israel, and I was very, very busy with analyzing and understanding the landscape of the Israeli politics, which I wasn't so involved before. So it took a lot of time and energy from me, until I started connecting the dots to what's happening here is not just happening here, it's happening in many other countries around the world at the same time. And then I started looking for the connecting threads and the similarities between countries, and identifying that there's something bigger, and that, you know, this is a global thing and not just a local thing. But I think around July 2020, I really stepped out to the streets protesting because of the law that was passed in July 2020 in Israel. And that's the, I don't know exactly how to translate it to English, but it's kind of the COVID Emergency Act, something like that. And really what it enables is it gives all the power to the government to set whatever kind of emergency rules that they want. And that, even the name of the law in Hebrew is the same name that was given to a very similar law in Germany in the 1930s that gave all the entitlements to the at the time the Nazi government.
It's emergency.
And so so that made me, like, I read about this law, and I read about what it's supposed to do, and I just saw what's coming. I saw how the next year or two are going to look like, thanks to that law that was just passed. And I said, I cannot live in that kind of country. I cannot accept this. I have to go out and do something. And then I started becoming a lot more active.
Yes. When was the Green Pass introduced in Israel? Because I think Israel was one of the first countries to introduce the Green Pass.
So the vaccination project started in the end of 2020, December, or the beginning of January 2021. And then a couple of months later, they started with the Green Pass. So around March 2021, I think. But when it started for the first time, just like they do with COVID, they have waves, right? The first wave, second wave, So even with the Green Pass, we had a first wave and a second wave. Why am I saying this? Because they started with us relatively early on for a few months, and then they kind of canceled it. Like they removed all the Green Pass after like 2 or 3 months. They removed all the Green Pass restrictions, and then they brought it back. A few months ago, they brought it back around, I think, July or August. And I remember during that period of time where it was not there, people came to me because I started resisting right at the beginning, right? I said, no fucking way that this is how we're going to live our lives, with discrimination and coercion. And people looked at me and said, you see, it's canceled. It's nothing's going to happen. And I said, no, this is a classic marketing tactic of putting the audience to sleep, because we don't want them to resist. We want them to accept everything that's going to come and comply. So we cancel it for a little while. We make you believe like it's not there anymore, and then we'll bring everything back up again. Just like with lockdowns, it's the same strategy.
It's similar to even being in an abusive relationship with gaslighting.
Oh yeah.
So it's on that same sort of, there's a parallel made there with gaslighting.
Absolutely.
Sort of,
Absolutely. The people that are sitting up there, I don't know where they are, whether it's local in every country, and then they have like strategy HQ headquarters somewhere in the World Economic Forum or wherever it is. Those strategists and those marketeers that are doing the work to plan all the moves that will happen in countries, they're not stupid. They're very smart, and they know exactly how to design those campaigns to be effective and how to drive people into action and how to get them to buy the narrative. Now, I've been doing a lot of work in kind of showing the world what they're doing without knowing who those people are, without knowing how exactly it's working. But as a marketeer, I can reverse engineer the whole process and show people how it's done, you know? So that's where my focus is. And if you'd allow me, I can elaborate on that, because I think that's a point, like the marketing or the strategies, those are point of views that most people don't have, and most people are not hearing every day. We're hearing a lot of point of views of doctors, of scientists, right, and maybe of journalists that are brave enough, like yourself, to like, you know, contradict the narrative, but we don't hear a lot of point of views of marketeers or strategists. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, and I cannot speak wisely about the numbers and the statistics, but what I know how to do is I know how to influence a perception, and I know how to convince, and I know how to build a story that will be so appealing and compelling to the target audience so that they'll buy it. And so I can look at the whole you know, landscape, or I call it a playing field, and analyze what's happening there, and then, you know, I can reverse engineer that. So basically, what most people see is the media. They see what's in the front line, right? This is what people see. Like the majority of the public, they see the media. Even if they say, you know, I've disconnected, I don't watch TV, or I don't read the newspaper, they're still exposed to it because it's the public discussion. That's like the mainstream narrative. So the media is in the front, and in normal times, the media has a lot of important roles, like, you know, making information available to us, giving it credibility, passing on messaging. It's perceived as trustworthy, as objective, as covering the truth or covering the reality, and it helps us make decisions. This is like in normal times. This is what we are used to believe about media, but now is not a normal time, and we feel and we experience a media that is that was bought in for a certain agenda, that is not diverse. It's not allowing for a stage that is diverse enough with different people with different views. It doesn't create debate, right? It only has one narrative to convey, and it tries to convey messaging such as there's an enemy, there are people who are conspiracy theorists. It tries to demonize or delegitimate people, whether they'll be doctors or scientists or people that are just holding a certain view. They're doing it in the mainstream media, and they're doing it on social media. And the mainstream media is in the front, but and that's what we see. But what we don't see, and what's behind the scenes, is the marketing strategy that is holding that media, that is using that media as a platform to push those messages and those agendas. That's what we're not seeing, and that's what only people that have that knowledge are understanding and are seeing, like me, for example. So
I agree with you. How would
so there's sorry.
No, carry on what you were going to say.
Okay, so there's what we need to understand about what we're not seeing, about what is behind the scene, that those marketeers behind the scene have built a brand. At least that's what they've tried to build from the beginning. COVID is a brand.
Yeah.
It's a brand just like Nike, just like Coca-Cola. It's a brand, and it has all the characteristic of a brand. They want to try and create brand affinity with the target audience. They want you to think that the brand is trustworthy, They want you to buy the product of the brand. The product of the brand can be a vaccine. It can be a lockdown. It can be a restriction. You need to think that that product is for your own good because it's part of the brand, and the brand wants your best interest. Each brand that respects itself has a set of values. This is how marketeers build brands. They characterize the brand and they give the brand, just like as if the brand was a human being, they give it values. And a good brand that has values normally has positive values, like values, for example, like partnership or trustworthy, or these kind of values. But in this instance of COVID, the brand values are fear and control. These are the brand values. We always go back to these values. Whatever action of the brand, of COVID brand that you will analyze, you will always end up with fear or control. If you take it back and ask, why are they trying to make me feel that way? Why are they telling me to do this action? Why is this happening the way it's happening? There is always one answer behind it, and it's the value of fear or control, fear-mongering, control, deceit, etc., and greed, right? But these are the values, and they will never expose those fears, those values explicitly to the audience. It will always be there behind the scenes. And then there are campaigns, like out of that brand, out of these values of the brand, the marketeers that are sitting somewhere out there are strategizing different types of campaigns with different types of tactics. I can elaborate more about that if you want, but it's all a playbook. Marketing and branding is not magic. It's all tactics. And they're following very, very clear tactics in order to reach their objectives, their KPIs. KPIs is a key performance indicator. They have KPIs for their campaigns. They are measuring themselves based on their KPIs. For example, the level of vaccination in a country. This is a KPI. Someone told them that the level of vaccination should be 80% or 90%. Or for kids, we need to reach 50% by this and that time. That's a KPI, and they need to meet that KPI with the campaign. And that's why they're doing everything they're doing, because they're working in a very well-planned campaign-based mechanism. There is no magic. They're all tactics.
Yes. No, I agree with you. My background actually is in advertising, so I understand what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, going back to the protest and the protest movement, how have you seen it change, evolve? Is it growing? Is it or is it shrinking? What is your impression of the general protest movement in Israel?
All right, so that's a very good question. So, and it's quite complex for people that are not in Israel to understand, but I will try in very few words to explain it. From around May, even April 2020, and until the last elections we had in March 2021, there was a big protesting movement in Israel that was protesting to bring down the current government, the previous government, Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And that protesting movement was mixed with messages of anti-corruption government, and we want to take it down, but also some people were protesting about the draconian COVID rules. It was kind of mixed together. And for some reason, people that were already starting to buy into the narrative of the vaccinations and that the government is doing something good for them, we're kind of trying to separate those two narratives and focus only on the anti-Bibi protests.
Right.
And therefore, a lot of the power that people had in that movement, that protesting movement, was taken away from the main, I think, from the most important thing that we need to resist, and it's the COVID acts right?
Yes.
And so it created a situation where a lot of people that were active in the movement during this year were not putting the emphasis or the attention where it was important. And now, after the elections and Bibi is gone, and now we have a new government, a lot of people have fallen into the trap of believing that now it's good. Now we've changed the government, it's good. But the reality shows that nothing has changed. We are with the same COVID acts, even worse, right? The government is against the citizens. There is huge discrimination and coercion, just like it is everywhere in the world, but it really worked. I mean, worked for whoever wanted it to work, the change government. And they managed to manipulate the people to believe that they don't need to protest anymore and they don't need to resist.
Right.
And so the size of the movement in Israel has shrank, unfortunately, and much fewer people in Israel are active in this current protesting movement. Right. But we are a very strong core of resistance in Israel that is not giving up and doing everything we can to try and bring this back up again and raise awareness and show people the lies and the deceit so that they will join us again. So that's why it's a complex question, because in terms of numbers, I think we're going down and we're not doing as well as we did a year ago when we were protesting against the government. But in terms of power and determination and where we want to take this movement, we are full steam ahead. There are various types of activism projects that are happening at the moment that are not just protesting in the street. There are many things that are happening. For example, we have people waking up at 6 a.m. in the morning, going to specific health officials' homes to protest there. We have people who are going to the prime minister's house to protest there early in the morning, and we get coverage on social media for things like that. There is a big project happening now for signage on bridges all around the country. We have a very small country, as you know. Israel is small. And people are seeing, physically, you can see signage everywhere, wherever you're driving. It's a very small country to navigate. So a lot of activists have printed signs. We have collected money, and we are putting those signs all over bridges, so that people that drive around the country can just be aware of, you know, the protest and the movement. So there are different types of activism activities, I would say,
we have something
that are happening in Israel, not just the protests themselves.
Yeah, we have something similar in the UK with people holding up yellow cards along the sides of roads, you know, sort of raising awareness of the dangers of the vaccines. And so it's slightly similar. Yes. Use a sort of graph.
But I want to say, you asked about the atmosphere in Israel, and I also want to talk about why do Israelis don't participate, and why do they buy all the lies of the government, right? Because I think this is a core question that a lot of people ask us. And this takes me back to the way we are educated. Israel is a young country. We're 70, 80 years old. And from the beginning, you know, the whole narrative is we are haunted. This country is given to us because we went through World War II. And now we have a safe haven in one country, that every Jewish person around the world can find that safe haven and come here and feel safe, that this is your home. But always remember that there's someone there to take you down, that there's someone there to haunt you, right? This is like your upbringing, your conditioning as a Jewish person, as a Jewish Israeli person. And there are enemies around us, like the Arab countries, that we always have to be alert for you know, wars that may occur. And so as an Israeli, as a Jewish Israeli, you grow up always in a state of alert, in a state of fear, some kind of, it's like, it's in the background. It's not like you're walking around in the street fearful, but you are always, you know, that that the next threat is behind the corner and something can happen. And the way we are brought up in school as kids, we are being taught about all the different wars we went through as Israelis from 1948 all the way to today. And we talk about the World War II, and we learn about these things. So this is installed in our education. And then as kids and adolescents, we are also always being talked to about the army that is about to come when we turn 18. And then we have a mandatory service in the army for 3 years for men, 2 years for women, kids, not men and women. And we know that that's about to come. And what's the army culture? Obedience, right? You have to do what you're told. You have to go to the army, you have to obey, you have to comply, otherwise you can be sent to jail, to an army jail, to a military jail. And so that's our conditioning, that's our upbringing. We are being taught to be compliant, to be obedient, and to be in a state of alertness, a state of fear, of possible emergency. And then our reality, our day-to-day reality, even after we finish the army, is a reality of emergencies. Israel is a country where we have a lot of war, a lot of military projects, a lot of problems with our neighbors. And so we are used to living in a state where tomorrow morning there can start a war and we know what to do. If it starts, what we need to do is we need to listen to the government. The government has our best interest in mind, and we have to run to the next shelter and we have to obey, and that's how we will be safe. And then the war will be over and we will be okay again. So our conditioning of going in and out of emergency state is very good. It's amazing. And I think that's one of the reasons why Israel was chosen to be that country that will lead this vaccination program, and that will have such strong coercion and such strong discrimination, because most people, they buy the government's narrative. They know that the government and the army has just their best interest in heart. And it's not possible that the government will want to hurt us as citizens, right? So I think this is this is the atmosphere. This is like what's behind the scenes that is allowing us to accept what's happening. And this is why it's hard for people to wake up. It's hard for them to believe that someone wants to hurt them, because we are so used to living in that kind of conditioning, of that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, it's like a
so
state.
I hope, does that answer the question? Yes, I mean, that's my analysis of it.
It's you've given really good insight into that and explained that beautifully. I wanted to talk a little bit about, you posted a video on Twitter of Dr. Boaz Lev, the head of Israel's management team of epidemics. And it was a recorded meeting. I think it was discussing the vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset.
That's right.
He was, I think they questioned him on his knowledge of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And obviously from his body language and from what he was saying, it was as if he didn't know, he was just avoiding it, as if he didn't know anything about it. And it just looked very awkward. And could you give me some comment on that video? Yeah,
so I will not speak directly about him because I don't know him, and I don't want to say things I don't know, but I will speak about the general situation that leads to that kind of discussion. So the health officials in Israel that are guiding the government to do what it's doing are pretending two things. First of all, they're pretending that there are hardly any adverse effects from the vaccinations programs. They are pretending that the vaccinations are safe and effective and that people are not being hurt. And secondly, they are pretending not to know or not to see the evidence that are everywhere at the moment. The evidence are being shared by people themselves, by activists that are creating videos and documents, and it's all over the place. It's all over social media, it's all over the WhatsApp groups, the Telegram, it's everywhere. You cannot ignore it anymore, but they are pretending it doesn't exist. So this esteemed doctor that is the head of the committee that is advising to the government is sitting there in the parliament discussion for vaccinating kids 5 to 11. And he's being asked whether he's aware of 16,000 death cases reported to VAERS. And he says that the number sounds peculiar to him, and it sounds unrealistic, and it cannot be. And then he's being asked, are you not aware of the VAERS system? And he says, you can show me what you're talking about or the evidence later, and we will check it later. And, you know, kind of dismissing it. And then what you can see in his body language, his rhetorical body language, is not that he doesn't know, it's that he is embarrassed. What you see is a body language of a person, and this is again going back to my marketing and communication background. I know how to analyze these things. It looks like he knows he's lying and he's trying to hide it, and he's very, very embarrassed, and he's kind of holding his head. He's doing something like that.
Yes.
He's holding his head where his thoughts are coming out from. It's not related to his heart. It's related to, you know, thoughts. And he's hiding his face to almost not see his expression. And his very initial expression, if you take a look at the video again, he kind of has a small smile. And smile, sometimes people interpret it as I'm talking down at you, so I'm not like in your level. But really, a smile can be a sense of embarrassment.
Right.
A smile can be, I'm embarrassed by what's happening right now. I don't know what to do. I'm kind of smiling. It's trying to hide something. So that person and all the other health officials, they obviously know of all the adverse effects, because doctors are starting, and they have been reporting on it recently. A lot of doctors, some of them are hospital doctors, some of them are GPs, and they are very well ignoring it. They know what's going on. They know about the increase of myocarditis, strokes, thrombosis. They know about everything. It's out there. And even citizens that are going to hospitals are reporting about other people they're seeing in hospitals and what they suffer from and their ages and what happens to them. And no one is taking that into account. In fact, the Minister of Health is going up to stage again and again and again, and also on social media, reporting, don't buy all those lies that people are spreading. Don't listen to that fake news. Don't listen to the social media posts that are happening because they're lies. Yes. And he's dismissing tens of thousands of people that are crying out their personal stories, that are crying out their personal deaths in the family. And it's just horrendous. And every day that passes in Israel, we see more and more reports on deaths, more and more reports on deaths that are not related. They're not related to the vaccine, right?
Yes.
It's just heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. But, and what kills me more than anything is the audacity that people have to continue to hide from the truth, to continue to ignore what they're hearing. How can you ignore when people are coming and pouring their heart out to a camera and telling about what's happened to them and their personal stories and their loved ones that have died? How can you ignore that? It's as if this government is constructed out of evil people, bad people, and ones that have told so many lies that they can't go back on the lies that they've told. They're too embarrassed to admit those lies. So I don't know how this is going to change. It will change at some point. There'll be a tipping point where all these evidences that are being collected are going to be too much to ignore. It's not possible anymore.
Yes.
And then the rage and the anger that will come from the bottom up, from the bottom, the citizens, up to the government is going to be so strong that I don't know how it's going to look like anymore. I don't know how the resistance and the protests are going to look the moment that there will be this tipping point, that people will really start being upset at what's happening. And I think it's around the corner, because right now with the kids campaign, they are not succeeding. They've started the campaign about a week ago. Parents are not coming. Parents are not taking their kids to get vaccinated. The tents are empty.
So
and they're really trying hard.
They've authorized 5 to 11-year-olds. The Israeli government have authorized it, and parents.
They authorized 5 to 11 years old, and they started the vaccination campaign. And they're using all the marketing tactics they have. They're pouring millions and millions of shekels on these campaigns, which is ridiculous. They're bringing all their influencers, all the kid celebrities, and they're trying to buy the kids as if they were Hansel and Gretel.
Could you give me some insight on the religious community in Israel? Now, I know in New York, the rabbinical court made a ruling and they were against the vaccines for children, teenagers, young men, women, unless you're elderly or in high-risk group. They absolutely, outright said, no, the community must not take it. This is in New York. How is that being translated in Israel? How are the religious communities there? Are they taking the vaccine?
Okay, so I will answer from what I know, and I know a lot of people in the religious community. The religious community in Israel is very diversified. It's made up of different groups. There are different types of religious groups inside the religious community. So you'll have the ultra-Orthodox, and you'll have the more light Orthodox, and the more light Reform, and and people that are just traditional and not full board religious. So there are different streams, and they're big groups. Each one of these groups are very, very big, and they behave differently. What we see in the ultra-Orthodox is these are groups that were never constitutional. They never believed the government. They never worked with the government. They were always anti-government. So even now with COVID, the only people that they listen to are their rabbis. They don't listen to the government. So whatever the rabbis say, that's what they do. So if the rabbi of a specific community will come and say, don't vaccinate the children, don't vaccinate the pregnant women, don't vaccinate whatever adolescents, they will not do it. It's like, that's it. The rabbi said, it's God, it's way more important. So that's one. And there are many of them that are following that kind of belief system. And, they talk to experts from abroad, like Dr. Zelenko, for example, and they follow that guidance. Other communities are following the narrative, are buying the government's recommendation, and are vaccinating their people. And you can see that in New York as well. There are some communities there that are following the same religious Jewish communities that are following the same guidance. But there are a lot of people in the religious community that are taking part in the resistance movement and in the protests. And it's beautiful to see. And why am I saying that? Because mostly in Israel, the divide is so big between groups, between secular and religious, between Arab and Israeli, between men and women. The divide and conquer tactic has always worked brilliantly in Israel, in every place you want, right and left wing. Beautiful, right? But now in this resistance movement, you see different from people you see people from different groups coming together with no connection to which stream they come from, to which community they come from. So in our protests, you see religious people and Arab people and Ethiopian people and men and women and whatever you want together, which is so heartwarming. It's so beautiful. And that kind of unity, I know that will grow more and more, because only in our unity and putting all the differences aside, we can, resist this, and we can, make our voice heard, and our light shine. And so going back, just looping back to your question of the religious community, I think that, as if I try to generalize, most of the religious community is not falling to the traps of the government and is not complying. And you can also see a lot of how would I call it, like trying to manipulate the situation to their own good, meaning if they don't want to collaborate with the government, they may do copies of the green pass, or they pretend that they got vaccinated and they didn't. They will, they will try and get their way around without collaborating, really.
Yes, right. Now, and just the situation on the ground with the green pass. So basically, to go into, tell me where you have to always show your green pass. Is it restaurants, shops? Is it everywhere? Any public space you have to show?
It's not everywhere at the moment. It's in restaurants, in concerts, in not in shops, cafes, cinemas, event spaces, so weddings and things like that. Music concerts, parties, big parties. So any big gathering.
I see.
Yeah. So basically, and this is how I group this category as leisure and entertainment, because the strategy behind this, and this is always where I take it, is to make you feel miserable, right? If you don't comply, you're being punished. So all the good that life can give you, you are being prevented of. So that's the strategy. But the beautiful thing is that people like me and my friends that are, not complying with this bullshit, we just create our own alternative world of leisure and entertainment. We don't need that crap. Like, we have our own home shows and and cafes, and there are some cafes, by the way, that are not complying, and we can go and have fun. And
the ones that are not complying, are they getting fined for not complying?
Some of them do. It's a lot of threatening at the moment to get fines, not many in practice, but some do. They don't have enough personnel in the police to enforce everything, so they're doing it, to scare. But they will get fined if the government decides to be more strict about it. They will get fined if needed. But it's stupid. Like some of them even they have the signs outside the restaurant saying that you have to go in only with a green pass, but in reality they wouldn't check, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how would the police really enforce checking? Would they put a police officer there to look at the person in the entrance that always has to check everyone? So it's very hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I
don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted you to, as your sort of final comment, what would you say to somebody who's feeling frustrated, who is sick and tired, and feeling maybe even sort of deflated, and maybe what they're doing will not make a difference? How would you speak to somebody like that? What would you say?
So first of all, people who feel that way have to understand that this is a mind control game. What is happening here right now has nothing to do with health. It's all a mind control. It's a mind fuck, actually. And if you fall into despair, if you fall into frustration, which is very, very natural and normal, and it's okay as human beings to be there. I have days where I'm up and days that I'm down, and it's completely normal. But if you fall into that state for a long period of time, it means that they got you. It means that their latest trick, their latest manipulation, their latest campaign got you. And you need to remind yourself of that. You need to observe yourself and check the period of time where you feel down. If it's more than 2-3 days, ask yourself the question, have I bought the recent scaremongering or fear-mongering campaign? Why am I feeling down? What is making me fearful? If I'm fearful because they said that they are going to do this and that to me, they're going to force vaccine in my house, then you've just bought into the mindfuck game. You just bought the narrative, right? And what we have to remember, this is a mindfulness game, a mind war. You have to always remind yourself that someone is playing tricks with how you think and believe. Okay, and you have to observe yourself in what you are believing right now, what you are afraid of right now, what you are thinking right now, and then identify what kind of thoughts they are. If it's something that is going to just fulfill you and drive your energy into action, great. Sometimes we can feel upset and we can feel fearful, and then we know how to channel that energy in order to do something about it. And sometimes we feel bad and depressed and we don't see the light in the end of the tunnel, and that's where you need to be concerned. That's where you need to stop, and it's a red alert, and to say, hold on, if I'm not seeing the light in the end of the tunnel, it means I have fallen too deep into their lies and into the manipulation, and I need to do some work on myself. And then you have to do, I don't know what it is for you, each person is different, meditation, yoga, go to see a psychologist, go to a good friend and talk to them, read a book, do something to help your soul, to help your mind. Because if you're not going to help yourself, you're going to fall into despair. And this is the time where we have to be really vigilant about taking care of our soul and our mind, because it is a mind game, a mind control game. And then if you manage,
warfare, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's psychological warfare.
It's completely psychological. And this is what marketeers and strategists are doing. They are building action plans and campaigns and brands and narratives that will control your feelings. In the end of the day, they want to make you feel a certain way. And remember, if their values are fear and control, what they're going to make you feel is afraid, scared, and controlled. Yes. And if you feel that way, that's a warning sign, because they succeeded. Yeah. And it's 1-0 to them. And you have to remember that, and then step out of it. Snap out of it, like slap yourself. I don't know what you need to do. Slap yourself and say, hey, no, I've fallen into the narrative. I have to wake myself up again, because you're going to have to do it every few days or every few weeks. It's going to happen again and again, no matter how strong you are, no matter how understanding you are. Like, you may be a very logical person and you're following the data and the statistics, and you're reading a lot of articles, and you're very smart, you're very intelligent, but emotionally, in terms of feelings, you may not be so sophisticated. So you have to start being a lot more aware of your emotions, of your feelings, and don't hide them, and don't ignore them. Pay attention to them, because they are your warning signs. They will help you navigate this time. And there are a lot of actions that you can take in order to channel that energy to a good place. For example, you can do petitions. You can go and take legal actions. Not that I believe in the legal system right now, but you can do that. You can create communities around certain actions that you want to take. You can protest. You can do. You can work in explaining. So you can work in messaging, in content, and create messaging and content that will help people explain the situation. You can volunteer. You can donate money to organizations that need your help with your talent, with your expertise, with your time, or even financially. You can continue posting on social media, right? I know a lot of you are doing that, which is great, but what my tip to that would be, not to post on social media out of anger and resentment, but rather voicing your opinions and voicing your positive messages out there to make people see, and then don't buy into the arguments, because people will come back at you with their stuff and confront you and insult you and whatever. Just move on. You put it out there, move on.
Don't engage.
Right? You want to take the good stuff with you and ignore the bad stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you'll just be, you have to really know how to work with social media, because it's a dangerous tool that can take you down again.
Yes.
So you have to be more aware on how you are behaving in social media. Okay. It can be poisonous, but it can also be very impactful and helpful.
Efrat, you have been amazing. I mean, thank you so much. I've loved talking to you. And I really hope to talk to you again sometime soon. To keep the conversation going would be fantastic. But thank you. Anything you'd like to say before we end? Anything else?
Yeah, one thing I will just add is that I am doing the Twitter live sessions, the Twitter space. It's called Twitter Space. Sorry, it's new to me as well. Twitter Space. So it's like a radio show or a podcast. I'm doing that every 1 or 2 weeks together with my sister friend Gal Ghul. She's an advocate, a lawyer, and together, and so she's so smart and she's a lawyer and she knows everything, and I'm just little me doing marketing. And we do this together every 1 or 2 weeks. So you can follow Gal Ghul or myself on Twitter or on Telegram. And we tell people when is the next session, and we host people from all around the world to talk about what's the situation like in their countries, to exchange information, to give hope. This is really one of our objectives in these spaces. We really want to leave people empowered in these Twitter spaces. And we had a recent Twitter space with Neil Oliver from the UK and Nick Hudson. You know Neil, I'm sure. And it was an amazing session, a 2.5-hour session. It's recorded and it's in our Telegram if you want to listen to it. So if you want to join us in the next Twitter spaces, please do.
Yeah, thank
you. And just the last thing is, don't forget how important your voice is during this time. I mean, Sonia, what you're doing is amazing, and thank you for doing this and for hosting people to voice their opinions, because we only have ourselves during this time, and we have to come together and we have to make ourselves heard, and we have to shine our light. It's the only way we can go through this period of time.
Yeah, and there's power in unity, isn't there?
Absolutely. Only together.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Efrat. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much for having me.